Okay. Hi, Robin. Lovely to see you.
Thanks very much, Helen. Good to see you too.
I just thought that this is quite a big month because it's Brain Tumour Awareness Month, and we've also got this launch of the Neuro-Oncology Special Collection, which it's not the end of a journey, but it's like a staging post, a line in the sand for a journey that actually started, I'm thinking, probably 8 years ago now, in 2013. So I thought what would be really good from this conversation between the two of us is, one is to capture the timeline and exactly what happened and when and how it all unfolded, but then also to talk about the significance of exactly what can be achieved when you collaborate, and also when you have that collective intelligence of clinicians and researchers and the people who are living with brain cancer, brain tumours, come together. I don't think when we first had this conversation in 2013 that either of us knew where this would end up. And I thought it's a really interesting story. And it's one, obviously, we're in the process of writing up. But I thought it might be quite a good idea to capture this on video as a legacy, if you like, as a historic marker, a line in the sand. So I think you first approached me in 2013 when you had some concerns that potentially there would be a disconnect about what was important for clinicians and researchers and what would be important for patients and caregivers and the people living with brain tumours. Is that right?
Yeah, I think if I remember right, in 2013, I was the coordinating editor for the Cochrane Neuro-Oncology group, and we'd been looking at trying to identify what the priority areas for doing Cochrane reviews were. And you were one of the consumers that we invited onto the group, along with Kathy Oliver from the IBTA. And when there were a number of clinicians, and when we asked everyone what they felt the most important topics were out of a list, we found that the clinicians chose one area, one group, and the patient representatives and consumers kind of chose a different group. So it got us thinking together that there's a bit of a disconnect between what patients and carers feel are important, the most important questions, and what clinicians might feel maybe a little bit more in their own specialist area or targeted as the most important questions. And then that got us thinking about doing a James Lind Alliance priority setting partnership, because the JLA established out of Cochrane, and they get patients and consumers and the whole community together to try and identify what the most important clinical questions that have been unanswered are. So back in 2013, we had a meeting about maybe setting up a James Lind Alliance group, which we did. We got some funding from charities, and you and I were in the core group along with Kathy and Kathy Oliver and Gail Quinn from Cochrane. And then we got a group of charities and patients involved, and also a group of clinicians involved from right across the spectrum, pediatrics, adult, from neurology, neurosurgery, oncology, neuropathology, psychiatry, anyone with an interest in the community of neuro-oncology, of what the most important questions were. So we set up the website, and we asked the community in the UK to put in what they felt the most important clinical questions were. There were about 400, 500, if I remember rightly, questions, and we narrowed these down. Some of them are duplicate questions, some had already been answered, but many hadn't been answered. And these ones that hadn't been answered, we had to try and get down to 10 of the most important clinical questions. And you know a wee bit about what happened there as well.
Yeah, we had a great meeting. I think it was in London, if I remember rightly. It was on a really, really hot day. Was that the day you had your briefcase stolen with your laptop? Right, yeah. But and that was facilitated by Richard Morley of the James Lind Alliance, who is now actually the consumer lead for Cochrane Evidence. And it was it was a very significant day because it was like the final phase in what had been an 18-month process, and one actually which we had done on a shoestring. You know, you hear some people say, oh, you need £150,000 to run a James Lind Alliance priority setting partnership. I think we did it on about £20,000, didn't we? And we used a lot of goodwill with people because they knew how important this was and how it was so needed, I think, to transform the clinical research landscape for neuro-oncology, which had been fragmented for very, very many years. And I think too, the other thing that was a key driver for me was we knew that there was funding out there for brain tumour research, certainly clinical research, but we knew that the quality of grants that were going in just really weren't making it, which is why they weren't getting funded. So that, I think, took us to about 2015. And then we had a huge dissemination strategy where I remember we ran it out through BNOS, the British Neuro-Oncology Society conference in the July. Was that in Liverpool? I think it might have been in Liverpool.
Yeah, I think it was.
To try and engage the clinical research community. But I think the key change agent in this was actually getting the NCRI involved with the Brain Tumour Clinical Studies Group, as it was then, and getting it embraced by them. But I think before then, you called together a massive meeting in 2015, didn't you, of the key players that we thought should be really taking this on board.
Yeah, the thing about the James Lind Alliance questions were that the James Lind Alliance are funded by NIHR, and NIHR are keen to get questions that are important for patients as well as the community, the doctors, etc. So they are more likely to fund research that is a James Lind Alliance priority research. And we had that meeting in the NICE offices where we had representatives or funders from NCRI, CRUK, Wellcome, we had NICE, we had people representing clinical trials units, with the NCRI leads.
Health economists,
yeah, RDS, Research Design Service. And the question there was really, why is neuro-oncology not getting enough funding, not getting funding, the proposals that have been put forward? And the answer that came back quite clearly was that a lot of people are just doing their own research within their unit. And in order to try and get something funded, there should be at least 3 centres working together. You get more likely to be funded if you've got a trials unit working with you. You're more likely to be funded if you've worked with the Research Design Service and if it's a priority. And for all of these funding applications, you need a good up-to-date systematic review of the literature for each of the areas you're going to go for. So we kind of took that sort of menu and put it together, and we decided we'd run that through the NCRI Brain Group, Supportive and Palliative Care Group, and we'd try and take each of the James Lind Alliance questions and work on them and try and see if we can get a fundable proposal out of it, as well as doing systematic reviews, which would help any funder who's any researcher who's going for a funding application. So I think it helped the community, it helped the funders, and patients were involved in that process as well. And through your incubator days that you ran through the NCRI.
And that we're still running.
You're still running. We're still
running. Some of them, I think, we're on the 2nd and 3rd iteration now. But yeah, and I think it was almost like, you know, we had that top level overview where we had all of these stakeholders involved. They absolutely bought into the James Lind Alliance Priority Setting Partnership. They realised how that these top 10 uncertainties could become the mortar that would bring together the clinical research landscape. But underneath that, there was the other layer that we were doing with these incubator days. So an incubator day it's like, if you like, a hotbed of research where you get patients and caregivers and clinical researchers and clinicians in a room together around one particular topic. So for example, it might be interventions to help caregivers cope, or it might be something around fatigue. And we look at what the latest data is showing us, what the latest evidence is showing us, and then pull all that thinking together with the expertise that's in the room, which includes patients and caregivers, and come up with a protocol. And then it's ready to go when the funding call comes in. So I think, you know, that's been a slow burn, but I think, you know, we've had 3 or 4 incubator days every year since, and I think that's been a key driver in all of this. And then so that, I think that meeting, that big meeting was in 2015, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And then we put in the application to NIHR to get the funding.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah, with
So
yeah.
for that, we'd already done some systematic reviews on some of the topics, but there was a call for funding for systematic reviews, and we put in a proposal to look at 8 complex systematic reviews, and we decided we'd do that along with members of the NCRI group. And I think that was really important as well, because it pulled in the NCRI group and Cochrane into doing systematic reviews and finding what the level of evidence was, so you know what the next step in the research pathway is. And that was quite successful. That was a kind of 3-year grant, and that's just finished.
It has. And that was really important to me, because at that point I had also been invited to be as the consumer representative on the NIHR Systematic Review Programme grant, which was a 3-year tenure. And I remember when the neuro-oncology systematic review grant was being discussed, I had to leave the room because, you know, obviously there was a conflict of interest. And when I came back in, I was trying to read people's faces to see if we'd got the grant or not, but they were so poker-faced, I just had no idea. So it was really exciting when we heard that we'd got the funding to do those 8 reviews.
It was really good, and I hope that these reviews, once they're all published, so 4 of them have been published, 4 of them are ready to go this month, and it's Brain Tumour Awareness Month. It'll be a big push for publicity about the levels of evidence round about important things like GBM in the elderly, and about what to do if there's failure from chemotherapy with chemoradiation therapy. What's the next best treatment? And these are what we call network meta-analyses, and they're really complex. They look at all different sorts of treatments put together and what is the most likely thing to be of benefit. And again, as I say, they just act as, this is the level of evidence just now. Where do we go from here? Yeah. There are the ones on early diagnosis and interval imaging. And the interval imaging ones have been developed on to a position paper which has been published in interval imaging. So that all helps flesh out the question and the evidence and where people think we are, and the collaboration in order to get further research. Yeah, and so,
I think all of these are really, that, you know, all of these create touch points, because I know we've taken these 8 reviews, which are going to be launched as a special collection by Cochrane, but we've taken them and we've categorized them into 3 areas. So there's, how do I get a prompt, safe and accurate diagnosis, and then shared decision making and risk sharing in glioma, and understanding the best treatment when decisions are difficult. And I think most importantly that these create touch points for people who are living with brain cancer. I mean, we know that getting a prompt diagnosis is a concern, and everybody thinks actually getting an early diagnosis can only be good, but actually there is a flip side to that where you can reframe it, and it's a very complex issue, which is why this review is so important. And then, you know, we know that shared decision making, where patients and caregivers are co-pilots in their care, and they can go in and have that equal conversation with their clinician. They're more likely to have better outcomes. They're more likely to adhere to any treatment regimens. They know what's important to them. So, you know, they can focus on having their best possible day. And then we know too, you know, for example, treatment decisions when you're older, or when your brain tumour comes back, what's important to you. So I think all of these are really important. And I think you're absolutely right to have those position statements or position papers that we can now do. I think we're just working on one with early diagnosis. We've done the interval imaging one. They're just going to bring power and heft, I think, to the dialogue. So that's really important.
Yeah, going back to the JLA, these are unanswered questions. So we know that the evidence is, we've got to look at all the randomized trials that have been done and the strength of the evidence. But if the randomized trials that have been done round about these areas are not sufficiently strong, it means we've got to add to that evidence, because that evidence is really important to drive guidelines in future. So if we can stimulate the research community to come together, 3 or more centres working together. Sometimes the shipping study will hopefully be about 10 centres working together. Spring is many centres in the UK, the seizure prophylaxis glioma working together. That's the way we're going to be able to get funding, and that's the way we're going to be able to answer these questions with some certainty.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the shipping study? Because I think that's going to be significant for our community.
Yeah. Okay, well, one of the questions, the GLA questions, is about does early diagnosis improve survival? And therefore, and the early diagnosis question, or prompt diagnosis question, is very important for the community. So many people feel that there's been a delay in their diagnosis. And if there's anything we can do to try and improve that situation, then we should do that. And we know that some presentations are actually quite quick presentations. So if someone presents with a stroke-like presentation or weakness down one side, they present quite quickly. They know that they shouldn't have that, and they go to see their GP. GP realizes you shouldn't have it. They may have some signs, and they're sent in quite quickly. Similarly, if you have seizures, well, you're more likely to get seen quite quickly, particularly if they're big seizures rather than small seizures that might go unnoticed. So the ones that are slow to present, the patients that are slow to present, are those who have headache presentations and cognitive presentations together. And of course, headache is such a common condition that it's very important to try and identify what aspects of the headache are really important, what aspects of the headache are different from your common primary headaches with migraine, tension headaches, and things like that. And the shipping study is a prospective study looking at patients who are going for a CT scan. So the GPs felt this headache suspicious, going to send this patient for a CT scan or an MRI scan. And before they have that MRI scan, they're assessed. The history is dissected down into detail. And we also do a neurocognitive test, a quick neurocognitive test called semantic verbal fluency test. How many animals can you think of in a minute? It's quite simple, but we know that patients who have got problems in their head don't just have headache, they have headache plus. So they have headache plus mild, subtle cognitive problems that just slow them down very slightly or affect their memory slightly. And this is like a very quick test that any GP could do. And we're interested in finding, if you dissect the headache symptoms and headache associations and look at this semantic verbal fluency in 5,000 people who are going for scans from about 10 centres over the next couple of years, then we should be able to see if there are any red flags within the headache history and red flags within the other associated things. Or it might be things within the headache, within the overall history, that means it's very unlikely that this person's got a tumour. It might be that it's just part of a pain syndrome generally, or some other things that mean actually you don't have to have imaging. Don't worry about this. This is not something that's a tumour. So if we can identify more clearly those who have got headaches and worrying symptoms and maybe abnormalities of semantic verbal fluency, we need to speed these people through the system, because even the waiting time for a scan is weeks, and that's too many weeks, basically. So we need to expedite those who we think are at high risk, and the ones where maybe they don't require, they need another type of opinion, then we can divert these in, which will cut down the number of scans and mean that the scans can be done more quickly. That's kind of aim behind it.
And I mean, that came out of an incubator day that we probably did 2 years ago. So it just shows, and it was already building on research that you'd done. And I think it just shows that we're in this for the long game. These are not quick wins, and it's worth hanging in there and holding into the research to get it right. I think we're hoping to submit that fairly soon, aren't we? The shipping.
Yeah, there's a call for NIHR. It's called HSDR, Health Services Research. and that's in June, beginning of June. So we've got a trials unit that's working with that. We've got health economics from Newcastle,
Multi-centre.
multi-centre. The main lead of that research is going to be a clinician and neurologist down in Cambridge, and
I think
I'll help out.
8 to 10 centres, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, 8 to 10 centres.
Yeah, and patients and caregivers have been involved all the way through.
Start.
Exciting.
Yeah.
So I want to go on to talk about the collaboration, and I think it's down to our ethos that we're none of us as smart as all of us. But there was just one other time point that I remember, and that was we were involved in the review of the Improving Outcomes Guidance in 2018, and it was, I mean, you know, a real gift really was that we were able to align one of the reviews with the NICE Improving Outcomes Guidance review, so that they had absolutely, you know, hot off the press. What was that, the neurosurgical?
Yes, it's an extent of resection systematic review. So looking at ways to try and improve extent of resection. So that's really important. Obviously, you want to try and remove as much tumour as you can, but you also want to try and minimize any risk to the patient when you're doing that, or you're not going to be thanked for it.
Yeah.
Obviously, so looking at the risks and benefits of extent of resection. So that was a very quick review we did there, and then we've updated that with a network meta-analysis, which completed just at the end of last year. And there are some trials which have used some of that data, some of that evidence to neurosurgeons have put forward ideas for trials around extent of resection.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of these ongoing just now. Helen, you're probably involved in the...
Yeah, so there's Future GB, which has been, the principal investigator was Puneet Plahar, the neurosurgeon in the John Radcliffe in Oxford. And I think, yeah, that there's even just talking to you now, I'm beginning to realise, you know, it's the ripple effect that probably wouldn't have got funding without the James Lind Alliance. Well, it wouldn't have done without the James Lind Alliance priority setting partnership behind it. So it just goes to show how transformative this has been, I think, for the clinical research community.
Yeah, it's very important also for patients and carers to know that they can get involved in these things.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, we've all been involved in it right from the beginning, from putting forward the questions, etc. And it is not, when we ask for involvement, we're not just asking for a nod, to nod something through. We're asking for involvement from the question,
yeah,
through to developing patient information data for patients, ensuring that the questions that we're asking are relevant and are put in a way that's reasonable. And if things are not, if we're not recruiting fast enough or well enough, getting the input of patients and charity organizations to try and promote some of the research we're doing, explain why we're doing it in simple terms that are easily understood, because we sometimes just go off on a tangent and down a rabbit hole. Yeah.
And I think when we first started this, I was so excited by it, but I had no idea of the depth and the breadth that we would go to in the scope of this project, or that it would take 8 years, and we're still not, I don't think we'll ever be at the end of it. And we'll talk a bit about next steps in a minute. But I think for me, the difference is up until that point, any public and patient involvement had been a bit like a project fairy. Oh, we've got this project, we must involve PPI. But with this, it's been seamless throughout, right from that very first conversation that you and I had when you said you'd got this problem, because we'd got this massive disconnect. And I think this whole process has really conceptualized PPI as a social dialogue and learning between researchers as the public. And that social dialogue actually is the end in itself. It's not about, oh, we need some patient voice in the James Lind Alliance PSP, or we need patient voice looking at patient information sheets in the shipping study. We have really been present throughout all of this. And I think that's what really excites me about this project, is that it does reflect a true collaboration between the charities. You know, in my case, it's brainstrust. We've been there throughout all of this, through the Cochrane organisation, through the NIHR, whether, you know, it's through funding, going on grant panels, and NCRI with the Brain Group and the Supportive and Palliative Care Group, the James Lind Alliance, and NICE. Yeah.
And NICE. I mean, it's everything really. The other important thing is not just, I mean, you're committed to neuro-oncology and brain tumours, and that's why everyone wants you involved, but you involve other people as well through, when there are questions, you're able to run them by discussion groups and come back with feedback from the discussion groups that are important for us and for the funders to realise we've done that and people have been involved in these decisions. So yeah, so it is very important, and all of the organisations we've discussed, NICE, NCRI, Cochrane, NIHR, they all are interested in having good patient involvement and open patient involvement, and as much as possible to influence it.
Yeah, it's been phenomenal, and I'm glad it's not over. So what's next? I suppose I'm really keen. My fingers are itching to get on the next 10, you know, numbers 11 to 20, that we just keep saying we must look at them, but we just haven't had capacity to do it. So I'm really excited about that potential. I think, you know, we're now in year 6 following the first James Lind Alliance priority setting partnership. I kind of feel maybe we should run it again.
I mean, it's I think you're right. I think priorities do change, things do move on, and there is a time for all of these. But we know from doing the Cochrane reviews that some of the top 10 are not answered yet, but and nevertheless there's 2 strands going to come from this. I think one is moving on from now, the information's there in the systematic reviews that are about to come out this month, Brain Tumour Awareness Month, and they will hopefully be being driven into position papers and getting those who are best at doing the research around the UK coming together and trying to get some funding for their area of research. And then there's the other 10 or 15, actually. There were 25 originally, so 15, and they need to be moved on as well. So they're a little bit behind, maybe 5 years behind, perhaps. And we should have a look at these as well. The James Lind Alliance thing is something that's being copied around the world now, because every country is slightly different. There are a slightly different model of healthcare, etc., and slightly different questions are important to other countries. So it is something that is, I think, here to stay. It's done very well.
And I mean, I don't know if you had the foresight, but certainly I think when we did the James Lind Alliance in 2015, I don't think it carried the significance that it does now. I mean, I'm kind of getting the feeling in the clinical research community that unless you've got some sort of priority setting partnership behind you as an anchor, then you know, the chances of you getting funded are pretty slim.
Yeah, we got in there fairly early, which was good for us, I think. And
it's a great story. You know, there's a methodology there that other disease areas can use as well.
Well, we were also looking at spinal cord, weren't we? And now we've just both recently been approached by a neurosurgeon who's keen at setting up a spinal cord tumour James Lind Alliance, and we'll try and help advise that group as well. Do that. So we've had some experiences. It's good.
Yes, good. And I just want to acknowledge, you know, everybody that's played a part in this, starting with the patients and caregivers and the clinical researchers and the clinicians too, because we wouldn't have got to this point where we're now about to launch the special collection at Cochrane without them. But I also want to acknowledge your role, because without you driving this, Robin, we just wouldn't have achieved what we have. So it's all power to you. Thank you.
Well, I mean, it's all teamwork, isn't it? and it's good ideas. You can keep a good idea down, I think.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's been a great way to spend an evening, and I just need to work out now how to stop recording this. So, thanks, Robin. Yeah, we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.